Today, we'll be discussing the stress response, specifically what happens when we experience stress for an extended period of time. And I want to start by giving a small list of various events that may cause one to feel stressed. The important thing to note, while this list is not exhaustive, is that stress can be experienced through a wide variety of different events, and these events can be both positive and negative, as well as major and minor. Regardless of from where the stress will arise, it is going to elicit the same response within our body. That response is often referred to as the fight or flight response. In this response, there's essentially two systems that are activated when we perceive stress. First, the hypothalamus will activate to the sympathetic nervous system, which will signal to the adrenal medulla to release epinephrine and norepinephrine. The purpose of these is to increase heart rate, respiratory rate, and blood pressure, things of that nature that essentially prime our body and make us more alert so we have a better chance of being able to successfully deal with the incoming stress. At the same time, the hypothalamus will also signal to the interior pituitary, which will further signal to the adrenal cortex, which will respond by secreting cortisol. So in this top-down approach, we see the end result is to secrete cortisol, which has the purpose of increasing our energy availability, such as the utilization of glucose, as well as to suppress non-essential functions, such as digestion. So essentially, the whole purpose of the stress response is to divert resources to more immediate use. We're basically trying to maximize the chance we have of being able to successfully deal with the stress. So the stress response is inherently good and healthy and necessary to our survival. The problem with the stress response is what happens when we experience stress on a very frequent basis. Long-term stress exposure, also called chronic stress, is an issue with many people, as we can see here from some of the statistics showing that over half of the adults in the US and around 41% of adults worldwide will experience chronic stress. This usually arises for more big life changes, such as for financial reasons, job stability, things of that nature. So those are usually more negative reasons. But what happens is when we experience chronic stress, the stress response is perpetuated and stays elevated, which is going to result in further elevation of the stress hormones that we discussed, such as cortisol and epinephrine, and can cause changes to our brain that essentially make it more difficult for us to successfully manage the stress as we're constantly being bombarded by it. The ultimate problem with the elevation of all of these stress responses is that over time, they can be linked to chronic disease. So as we see here, while in the short term, these effects, such as impaired glucose regulation, aren't necessarily harmful, if we're exposed to them for long periods of time, that can lead to diabetes. Same thing for the rest of these effects, such as elevated cholesterol, potentially leading to heart disease, increased inflammation, that can lead to decreased immunity, elevated blood pressure, that puts people at greater risk of stroke, and excess glutamate can cause behavioral changes such as anxiety and depressive-like behavior. So the purpose in saying this is that while the stress response, these short-term effects are not inherently bad, the problem is when we can't manage our stress and it stays elevated, that puts us at risk for all of these long-term chronic diseases. So the important part now is to discuss what we can do to actually manage our stress. There's many different ways that this can be done. Often starting with lifestyle approaches can be very effective, such as incorporating more movement into your life or making your diet include more nutrient-dense foods. It can also be looking for better coping mechanisms, such as instead of drinking alcohol, maybe exercising or meditating, things of this nature. And if these lifestyle approaches don't work, medications are potentially available after assessment by a physician. These medications, such as antidepressants or beta blockers, can be used to essentially give your body the little extra help that it needs to re-regulate itself so you're able to better manage the stress. And then hopefully in conjunction with incorporating these different lifestyle changes, you're able to experience stress in a healthy way that allows you to come back down from it and not have it stay elevated. So, in conclusion, as we've said, chronic stress is a problem for many people, and the long term exposure to it is what leads to the negative effects. Stress, in of itself, is not a negative thing, but what we need to make sure we do is be proactive in management. So, once we feel the onset of stress or we experience a stressful event, what we should be focused on is utilizing strategies to be able to manage that so it does not turn to a chronic condition. Everyone is going to be unique in the different methods or strategies that are available to them, and different things are going to work for different people, which is why it's so important to explore different resources, such as the one we've linked here, an article from the Cleveland Clinic, and look into ways and experiment with things to find what works best in being able to manage your own stress. And here are references. Thank you.